is also very important for the average citizen to try to understand as they listen to my words. Lucifer's in control of the industry. I believe that within the next 5 calendar years, they will collapse the monetary system. The United States as we know it will probably cease to exist. And this was said 20 years ago in a DHS document saying in 20 years, the number one threat as domestic terrorists will be the white Christian male. Music drives the psychological programming and subsequent deprogramming of mostly children, because the children are the target of all of this. No one can even tell you with a straight face at this point what a woman is.
Premise, my friend, welcome to the podcast, man. In case you guys don't know, Premise is a music producer. He worked with Mac Miller. He's a new Grammy voter, and he's very well versed with what's happening around the world because you guys know we live in a crazy time. So we're going to dive right into it. Welcome to the podcast, my friend. How's it going, Premise?
Going good, guys. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on talking with you, gentlemen. You know, I started as a music producer years ago in '01. I picked up my first electronic device to create music and grew up in a music household. So there was always a studio in the house. My father's a lifetime drummer, raised me on band money, single dad. And very, very blessed to come from the home I came from because of the music influence. And then from there, around 2009 or so, I did connect with Mac, like you mentioned, rest in peace. Great individual, great person. One of the most in-depth creators that I've ever personally been around, and just a great contribution to music. So when I connected with him, he was still in high school, and he took a beat CD from me. It was the days of writing Sharpie on CDs, and I would network in a very traditional sense, just going to clubs and going to bars and meeting people and working through the web of the industry, if you will. And he blessed me with the track that we put on my project from 2010 called "Infiltrate, Instigate, and Expand." And truthfully, since that point, that has kind of been how the career has gone, for lack of a better term. From there, worked with some other legends, luckily in music, from Cool Keith of Ultramagnetic MCs to Capadonna from the Wu-Tang Clan affiliation, Pace One, known from his work with Eminem on The Outsiders from Detroit, countless other indie artists that have just helped progress my career through the years, and vice versa. From there, I kind of transitioned into more of a mixing and mastering role, working in my home studio in Pittsburgh for years. After college, I went to Pitt, and mixing and mastering different artists' music. And now, very luckily and blessed to be affiliated with the Philadelphia Grammy chapter through a connection I have to the president of that chapter. And now I'll be voting on the Grammys, and I'm not so sure they want that, but that's what they're going to get.
Yo, what does it take to become a Grammy voter, though? Because you imagine that it's these world-renowned people that everybody knows, because you're kind of on the up and coming, so we're honored to have you here. But what goes into you actually becoming a Grammy voter? Was there something you had to fill out, or was it purely based on connection?
Yeah, well, a little bit of both. I met the president of the Grammy chapter 8 years ago, well before he was even affiliated with the chapter. I was driving Uber part-time late night in Philadelphia, of all places. I picked him up in a bad part of town at a Taco Bell. And we started talking
Nice.
about music, and he's like, "Oh yeah," he's like, "Yo, I've worked with John Legend and Ludacris and The Wanted," and he's just worked with this countless and her. He's listed with this countless list of great creators, and we did some work that night. And then from there, he got involved with the Grammy chapter. So that connection is why I even knew about this to begin with. Now, fast forward, he's the president of the chapter. And I went to an event in February that was really just members, but he gave me a personal invite to get affiliated. And at that point, you do have to fill out somewhat of a form, an online form, but you have to get 2 recommendations from music industry professionals that have some credibility. And like I mentioned earlier, just working through the web in the industry, I was able to identify 2 very esteemed, established individuals who were willing to write me some recommendations. And they review you. It's a 6-month review process or so that was completed in February or so, or 5 months, and then by July they reached out to the newly minted members of the recording academy, and very thankful. It's a great, highly esteemed organization of people to be involved in, like you mentioned. Looking forward to developing that, working on some of the committees, the producer and engineers committees specifically, going out to some of the events around Grammy season, and trying to form it where I'm voting for quality music, because I'm sure we'll get into it. There's a lot of psychological warfare that flies around the music business, and the children are the target. And quite frankly, a lot of it makes me sick
Yep, yep.
as a man of God. And that's something that if I can combat that in any way in a democratic fashion, which is what this is, then I certainly am excited to do that.
Yeah, man. I mean, when it comes to the Grammy specifically, I know growing up that music inspires and also can really push down culture. So it can be, it's a teeter totter. It's a balance of, there's always an equal and opposite force when it comes to anything. But music, even going back to biblical times, was very, well constructed. Even King David did with King Saul. He used it to move a heart of a king and then ultimately a nation. So how do you see that happening in the music industry today? And what are kind of some of the things that go on behind the scenes, even potentially with AI, that can kind of help us to understand what is actually going on? Because there's a lot of misinformation. People don't know how everything's, the inner workings of that industry. So from your perspective, where do you see it going, and what are the current, key things that are working within it?
Yeah, well, I see it going. You mentioned the AI. I see it going further into that realm, which is both good for some parties and then also bad for some parties. If you have AI writing songs and taking from the knowledge that it can digest within milliseconds of all of the great songs that have been written, and then spitting something back out that may have taken, even today, a great songwriter hours to do, and they might not even be able to reach that level of songwriting, but AI can do it within moments. That truly is a threat to human ingenuity. And human ingenuity is constantly under attack because by default, individualism has been under attack due to group politics. And individualism is the key to creativity. So if you have anything attacking that, it's going to directly impact the quality of the creativity. And AI is a threat to that. But the first part of your question related to what I see happening in some of the trends in music, when you look at one of these popular artists now, say like Doja Cat, very, very well known, the new sex symbol. Obviously, sex is always sold. It's an age old philosophy, even going back to the times of King David and King Solomon and the Persian Empire, and the way that the women would be adorned with all of the sexual attire, the piercings, the chains, everything like that is all to drive the sexual energy, which tends to keep people separate from God in general. So when you look at an artist like Doja Cat, you look at one of these recent new videos, I forget which track it was, but she's adorned in the attire of the goddess Ashtaroth. And Ashtaroth of the Zoroastrian paradigm, all of that can be traced back to Babylon, where you have Nimrod as the original false god, if you will. And some say that Nimrod may have even been a descendant of the Nephilim. I encourage our viewers to do your research on the Nephilim. It's directly connected to Genesis 6:4, and a lot of things you see can be traced back to that one biblical verse and all of the world religions. But back to music, that drives people away from God and towards things that will drain their energy and drain their soul without them even knowing it. So when you have the imagery of Doja Cat, who is idolized by millions of young women, dressed in sexual attire like a goddess, with all kinds of demonic imagery flying around her, what parents probably fail to realize is that subconsciously, this is impacting their children in a way that they do not realize and probably do not want them to be impacted. But with the way that this has progressed with social media, and the indoctrination can be immediately streamed right to your brain, and you might only be a 10-year-old child that is still developmental, and you're in a developmental phase rather, and your child's psychology is very impressionable. These things impact society in ways that you will see 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And even looking at our age group, say men and women aged 35 to 45 or 35 to 50, in that range, think of how different things have gotten just from when we finished high school to now in society. So imagine now to when these kids are in the same position we are in 15, 20 years, how ingrained these concepts are going to be and how absent God would be in society. And that's the underlying goal of all that. So the music drives the psychological programming and subsequent deprogramming of mostly children, because the children are the target of all of this. And it's an unfortunate fact that I discovered through reading quite a bit. One of the books that your readers can look for is by Michael A. Hoffman, specifically called Psychological Warfare and Secret Societies. It was written in 2001, 2 months before 9/11. This gentleman basically predicted 9/11, among other authors that have done that in the past as well. But that point in time, everything changed from that point in time. There's another book to get called The Most Dangerous Book in the World. The name of the author is escaping me right now, but you can find these on Amazon. Um, the true history that you've been has been hidden from you. You can find out what that history is, and the music industry directly connects to all of these structures in ways that most people have no idea.
Dude, you being in the inside, man, I got to read these books because
You
I'm
do. You
I'm a
do.
decent reader, but it's very, inspiration, just educating myself either on politics, on economics, how to make more money, all of that kind of stuff. But I think we tend to ignore what people are talking about when it comes to who's running the world, these secret societies and organizations. And as you're talking about music, it's very interesting because growing up, man, I grew up in a Christian household. I was not even allowed to listen to like Toby Mac when I was young, bro. DC Talk, like those, I had to sneak those, CDs. I wasn't quite the cassette era. I'm 32. But I remember the only way that Isaac and I were able to actually listen to secular music was we had to turn on the radio at like midnight when we were in bed. We had a little radio, alarm clock next to us, and we would have to, turn it on and figure out how to listen to all, the best G105 songs and stuff like that.
Right.
And now that I have,
it's such a stark contrast, premise what you said about where we were even 10, 15 years ago to where we are today. Think about it with the Sam Smiths of the world, right? Where he's fully gone into satanic imagery. Even The Weeknd, if you probably saw the video, right? Remember
Taylor Swift, bro.
Taylor Swift, yeah. I mean, that's known. She psychologically has destroyed her entire audience. But I thought it was really interesting. I would love for you to touch on this I saw a video on X about The Weeknd when he was doing a concert. He briefly flashed Satan on his screen in the background.
Yep.
And it was so subliminal and so short that they caught it on video and slowed it down, and it literally came across the entire screen, Satan. And satanic imagery and, like you said, demonic symbols are really starting to come in to mess with the psychology or even the belief system of young people, and they don't even know what's happening to them. Where did this come from? Because I don't remember when I was growing up seeing that type of blatant, imagery of satanic symbols, or maybe it was just hidden more, and now they're just doing it and putting it out there and saying, I'm just going to do it and show it no matter what.
Right. Well, it goes hand in hand with progression towards where we're at now. And you can really trace the progression of satanic imagery in music to the origin of the death metal back in, like, say, the 70s and 80s, when that started becoming a thing with Ozzy Osbourne, and the death metal groups Pantera, Megadeth, and some of the imagery that they put in. And it was excusable because it was heavy metal, right? So in your mind, you think, oh, it's just a heavy metal stuff. Oh, no big deal. Yeah, we like the guitars. But that was planting the seed that has germinated and grown to where we are now. And there's some good documentaries you can find on that as well. I actually saw my first one when I was 18 years old on that topic. Never forget, in my dorm at Pitt, my first year of college, and I was just a new owner of a computer. I didn't have internet at home when I was a kid in the late 90s. Some of my friends did, but it was kind of rare. It was kind of like having a cell phone in the 80s. Some people did, some people didn't when I grew up. But by the time I got to college, I did. And I saw this documentary that broke down exactly what you're talking about, the origin of Satan and Lucifer being present in our music and in the music imagery. So now, fast forward now to artists like you mentioned, like The Weeknd, Taylor Swift,
Sam Smith.
Sam Smith, a very, very good example. I mean, that is just way off the rails. So I'll just cut right to the chase blunt. Lucifer's in control of the industry. When they fell from heaven, a third of heaven was taken down with Lucifer to come here specifically to manipulate and mislead humanity. That was the primary goal. It was one goal: keep as many humans as possible separate from the truth that is God and Jesus as possible. That was the primary goal. So those powers and principalities, they were afforded God allowed them to manipulate the thoughts of humans. And when when you sit and you have these weird thoughts, or sometimes when people, I gave up smoking weed, I gave up alcohol, I gave up anything that can manipulate my thoughts, because what that does is that opens doors to those powers and principalities influencing your thoughts and then subsequently influencing your behavior. So when you couple someone smoking a little bit and then popping on, say, the weekend, or some of these satanic, these covert satanic influencers, because it's covert. They'll never say that they are, but they've sold their soul to these entities, and some of them even talked about it in music. And I grew up a huge Eminem fan, but he talked about it.
He's been in
No
the
three.
news recently a lot too.
Yeah, I sold my soul to the devil. I'll never get it back. I just want to leave this game with level head intact. He was crying out because he realized what he did. And on an album that came out well before he was famous, called Infinite, he talks about his faith, and he names Jesus. He names Jesus in a track.
Wow.
Most people have no idea that Eminem named Jesus. And that was on Infinite. That was when he was unsigned. Then to get that deal, you in some cases, to get the ultra fame, like the artist you talked about, you have to sign your soul over literally. And these organizations can be traced. They can be traced, and you just have to trace the etymology. And when you trace the etymology, which is the origin of anything, it's the etymological root of whatever it might be. When you trace the etymological root of these organizations, you will go all the way back, like I mentioned, to Babylon and Nimrod. And the series that people need to watch that outlines all of this from beginning to end is by a channel called The Fuel Project, called Know Your Enemy. It's an 80-part series. And once you watch this Know Your Enemy series, everything I'm saying will have a little more tangible nature to it, because it truly connects everything from beginning to now, and how that's translated from the time of Babylon to modern day America. And modern day America being the last empire that this world will ever see, the last human empire that this world will ever see. And we are in those times. We are in those times of revelation right now as we speak. And it connects to music in many ways, going back to what you said. So with The Weeknd and the word Satan flashing onto the screen way back, people don't realize that on a Jay-Z record, on Reasonable Doubt, if you would play one of the tracks backwards, I forget which track it was specifically, you will play it backwards. It's specifically named Lucifer, and actually something along the lines of follow Lucifer, follow Satan. When you reverse it, ignore Jesus, ignore God, and it was a message, a subliminal message reversed. And that was way back when Jay was coming up, to even sniff the fame that he has now. And I'm not saying this all to bring down these artists. I'm just saying this all because regardless of what we want the truth to be, the truth is the truth. So people are going to like it or not like it. They're going to accept it or not accept it. But it's a personal journey to uncovering and deciphering and decoding what you're seeing and what you're hearing, to really try to be able to read the language. And everything is in the symbols with these organizations. Everything is in the symbols. A book by George Oliver called The History of Initiation from 1841 traces all the etymology of the origins of every what became present day secret society, their original roots, and it does it breaking it down by continent. The secret societies of the European continents, the secret societies of the Asiatic, the South American, the African, the North American, all of the continents, and he breaks it all down. This was written almost 200 years ago. But when you start reading it and learning about the Druids, and the different organizations that had then progressed into the Knights Templar being manipulated and taken over by these organizations and infiltrated, you then come to the truth. And this is something that is going to be very hard for many of our viewers to process and realize. But George Washington was a 33rd degree Mason, and he was heavily involved. And I'm going to read you something that was in the letters of George Washington. And this is an excerpt from a book called Pawns in the Game by William Guy Carr from 1958. He was a Canadian writer. The FBI actually reached out to him at the time about his writings because it was so in-depth and explosive. So let me read this to you. What George Washington was saying was the mere fact that someone had charged that the Illuminati was operating in America. George Washington said, quote, "On the contrary, no one is more satisfied with that fact than I am." Let that resonate for a second. He got a letter from a concerned citizen in 1789, got a letter from a concerned citizen asking, what is this
Bro.
Illuminati? What is going on? And what they had done was they used the Trojan horse philosophy. Prior to this, the Masons, a lot of the Masonic organizations prior to 1776, well, it didn't really exist, the Illuminati, till then. So until the Illuminati existed and was founded by a Bavarian named Adam Weishaupt in 1776, before they existed, Freemasonry was not really infiltrated as much as it is after this point. So he said, on the contrary, no one is more satisfied with this fact than I am. Quote, the Illuminati's projects, George Washington said, quote, had the separation of the people from their government in view. It is too evident to be questioned. Read that again. And the Democratic Party, George Washington said, had the separation of the people from their government in view. It is too evident to be questioned. And it's no secret that Washington was a 33rd degree Mason, and there's degrees beyond that as well. Just the public doesn't know that. There's degrees beyond that. Now, if you go into the Capitol building and you look up at the rotunda, you'll see a painting. And the name of the painting is the Apotheosis of George Washington. Apotheosis means becoming a god, becoming a godlike figure. And this is exposed by author Thomas R. Horn, and you can find videos of Thomas Horn as well. He's passed away, rest in peace. Skywatch TV was his publishing brand, and Zeitgeist 2025 breaks this down. But when you go into the Capitol building, you can see this apotheosis of George Washington, and it reflects exactly what the secret societies were trying to accomplish. Like I said, it's all in the symbols. It's always in the symbols. At the base of the Washington Monument, there is a bound Bible with the number 666 written on them at the base of the Washington Monument, bound. So all of this is hidden from society. If you fast forward 300 years, 400 years, and the U.S. is, a past empire, and a space traveler comes and lands here and is trying to figure out who lived here, who were these people, what did they believe, what did they think? When they find the rubble of Washington, D.C., and start going through what the symbols are and the monuments are and all of these things, they are going to think we were a pagan nation. In God we trust to these people did not mean the God of Judeo-Christian belief. In God we trust meant the God of Apollo and Lucifer and the Nephilim. That's the God that was really truly meant by in God we trust. And they were okay with allowing it on the money because they knew that society would think the opposite of that. This has been a plan since the United States was founded in 1776. There's no reason why you should be confused that the Illuminati was also founded in 1776. And there's also, in the symbols, when you look on the dollar bill, the reason there's space between the cap of the pyramid and the pyramid itself, that space represents the amount of time it will take for that one world order to come together. The cap is lowering down on your dollar onto the pyramid. That's why it says Novus Ordo Seclorum on the dollar bill, New World Order. They put it right in front of people's faces, but they can dumb down society by controlling all the pillars of the world, of the country: education, legal, entertainment, music, like we talked about, and everything serves the same purpose. But the general person is too lost in their own sauce and distracted by all the entertainment that is designed to distract them, to keep them from understanding what I'm even explaining to you.
Dude, so many people think that the Illuminati, the Masons, that whole people are running the world is a conspiracy theory, right? I know, I have some friends as well that kind of go down the rabbit hole that do their own investigation. And they've told me so many times that it's impossible to become a U.S. president without being a Mason, without being involved in the Illuminati. They're like George Bush, Barack Obama. It's impossible. So do you think there's been any presidents that haven't been part of that? Or do you think it's a prerequisite in order to actually become a president?
Well, I'll go back to 1963, November 22nd, 1963. And everything's in the numbers, 11:22. John F. Kennedy, nice sunny day, driving down the center of town with his beautiful wife next to him, Secret Service on the back of the car, and we all know what happens next. JFK, although the Kennedy family is one of the 13 Illuminati bloodlines, and this is exposed by a gentleman named Fritz Springmeier. You can find a book called Bloodlines of the Illuminati that has really been attempted to be kept from society's view. But Fritz Springmeier is the gentleman that really exposed all of this. He disappeared from Facebook a few years ago. I was following him. I was connected to him on Facebook, and all of a sudden, Fritz is gone. I don't know where he's not speaking anymore. Can't find anything on Fritz anymore. Who knows? Hopefully, God bless. He's just retired to being out of public view at this point because of all the things he exposed. But Kennedy knew what he was up against, just like RFK Jr. today knows what he's up against because they murdered his uncle and his father. And we'll get into that as well when we talk about David Sylvie and Project Artichoke and that memoir. But Kennedy knew what he was up against. He wanted to dismantle the CIA. The CIA, when you break down words, and everything's in the words and the symbols, you break down words, agency. What does agency mean? Agency means you are a fiduciary for somebody. When someone has agency in real estate, you are their fiduciary. You are the agent for that client. You are their fiduciary, which means you have their best interest at heart. You're very loyal to them. That's key. And you will not lead them the wrong direction because you treat them as if it's your own business. You're a fiduciary when you have agency. So you have to ask yourself, who was and is the CIA a fiduciary for? Well, unfortunately, they are not a fiduciary for the American people like most people would come to think. They are a fiduciary for the same organizations that we've been discussing. And Kennedy knew this, and he was going to single-handedly dismantle the CIA. And he had previously fired the director of the CIA at the time, Alan Dulles. Guess who was the head of the Warren Commission report? Alan Dulles. Why did the Warren Commission report come up with a magic bullet theory? Because Alan Dulles despised John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was the last real president this country had. It was a coup d'etat at that moment. And you can see this in the movie by Oliver Stone. We've all heard of the JFK movie. Kevin Costner delivers an amazing performance as Jim Garrison. Garrison subsequently wrote a book called On the Trail of Assassins, which I highly recommend everyone to get, where he outlines what he was put through. He was dragged through the mud well before social media. He was discredited. It gave him marital problems. It ruined his life. The fact that he was going to expose that the CIA was hand in hand, part and parcel with the coup d'etat to secretly overthrow the U.S. government. However, the government was already subsequently overthrown from within it. Kennedy was trying to make sure it didn't go further than it already was, which is why he didn't want to go into Vietnam. He was going to take away billions of dollars from this military-industrial complex that is owned and ran by the same organizations that we're discussing. And that's outlined by Stanford professor Anthony Sutton, who was a professor in the 60s at Stanford. Anthony Sutton wrote a book called America's Secret Establishment. He was, I believe, murdered under mysterious circumstances before it actually was released. But somebody at, I believe, Shrine Day Publishing put it out. And you can find that, America's Secret Establishment, Anthony Sutton, 1969 Stanford professor. And he outlines all of the sources. People will say, oh, what is this guy talking about? This guy's just some music producer with books behind him. What is he saying? Look, all I'm doing is doing you a favor, number one, by educating you. And number two, I am giving you the sources of where you can find this from credible folks. Dr. John Coleman, former MI6 operative and published doctor, Committee of 300, Conspirators Hierarchy. Anthony Sutton, Stanford Professor, America's Secret Establishment. If you read those two books and you truly realize that what has been put in front of you has been meant to keep you blind, then you'll come out of it. Really, it's the Matrix was not a mistake. Like Neo in the Matrix taking the blue pill, which I believe the blue pill was the one to learn, or was it the red pill? It was the red pill.
The red
was
pill.
the one to learn the truth. That movie was no mistake. Everything's designed. Predictive programming is a real thing. That's a whole other topic you can find on predictive programming, which is why citizens should be very, very concerned that the movie Civil War was just pushed very blatantly, and then simultaneously they have what I believe was an MK Ultra assassin, a new age MK Ultra assassin that missed, that was supposed to incite civil war last week when they took out a piece of Trump's ear.
What are your thoughts on the movie Leave the World Behind? Did you get a chance to see it?
I did, and it makes sense, and it also makes sense that Obama funded that movie.
Isn't that
Because
Producer,
He's-
executive producer.
Yeah. So here you go. Right now, we're going to go a direction that is also very important for the average citizen to try to understand as they listen to my words. Neuro weapons are far more dangerous than any gun, any AK-47, any Garrison edition. Shit, I'll even pull it out and show you the Garrison edition, which is always right over here next to me where it needs to be. 1911 Springfield Armory. This is useless against a neuro weapon, and I'll tell you why. In that movie, you see neuro weapons. All of a sudden, you hear this loud, high-pitched sound. You can't hear it. It's piercing. It's deafening. It stops you from moving. Internet is down. Everything is not working. There are electromagnetic attacks. That was predictive programming. These things exist. And they were exposed in a book by Dr. Robert Duncan, Harvard professor, and no longer there, obviously. He wrote a book called Project Soulcatcher 2. He worked on these programs with DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration. And Annie Jacobson, Pulitzer Prize winning author, has written a book called The Pentagon's Brain. And you need to pick that one up too. It exposes the truth about all of these things. So many years ago, the fact that human life is predicated on vibrational energy, and we all vibrate at our own resonant frequency, they figured that out. CIA figured that out. There was a project called Project Stargate that figured that out. And you can find some declassified documents on Project Stargate as well. It's classified from 95 until now, but from like 79 to 95, it's not classified. But there's still stuff coming out about the classified side because there's whistleblowers that are brushed under the rug and called crazy and demonized or even murdered in some cases. So these weapons, and this was exposed on Capitol Hill recently. You can find a video of the Senate Oversight Committee, I believe, where a gentleman has said, we have devices that can make someone think they're going crazy. Programmed schizophrenia, if you will, is a real thing. And that was exposed on Capitol Hill 2-3 months ago. I actually have the video I screen recorded on my phone. I'd be happy to send it over so you could drop it in the details here of the pod. So imagine you are sitting at home and all of a sudden all these weird voices come into your head. Well, there's technology called V2K, the voice of God technology. It was used in the Gulf War, and they beamed into the heads of Iraqi soldiers, "This is Allah, put down your weapons. This is Allah, put down your weapons," called V2K technology. And for a short time at army.mil, military website, legitimate website, for a short time, they took it down now, but I have a screenshot of it. There was a description of voice to skull weaponry. And they added up a blurb, what it was, what it did, how it worked. Well, Dr. Robert Duncan condensed all of this into a book called Project Soulcatcher 2. I don't know what happened to Volume 1. I can't find it anywhere. I've tried. I've looked everywhere you could possibly look for Project Soulcatcher Volume 1. Can't find it. Volume 2 describes suicide chatterboxes, where they actually have devices they can beam into your head that push you to rationalize committing suicide. And they have sick acronyms for these devices, like Satan, S.A.T.A.N, and they all stand for things. Christ, C.H.R.I.S.T. And Duncan describes all of this in his book. You can find it on Amazon. Again, I want to reiterate to your viewers, this is not just coming from my mind. This is coming from legitimate sources who either worked on the programs, were part and parcel within the programs, or the programs impacted them. There's a whole marginalized section of society called TIs, targeted individuals. And these people swear that they are targeted by these devices. But you know why nobody listens? Because there's a well-known principle in government and a well-known principle in a very advanced political psychology and poli-sci world, if you study it in school, and I studied it in college a bit, that unless 1% of a society, of any society, take any population, any country, unless 1% of that population is impacted by something, nobody's going to care and nobody's going to know. So you have 330 million people in this country. Unless 3 million plus or so are impacted by something, there's no voice. Sure, do they try to have a voice? Of course. Do they meet at the local where the AA meetings would happen and have their meeting? Of course they do. Do they meet at our local churches? Do they meet in our local town halls, fire halls, whatever it might be? Of course they do. But with TIs, these targeted individuals impacted by the same weapons that Obama in his executive produced movie, Leave the World Behind, showed you on Netflix that these weapons exist, that these weapons are not science fiction. There's only maybe 25,000 people in the country that are impacted because they have to test them. And they need unwilling human subjects. You know why? Because something called, the Geneva Convention. Maybe you can't use human subjects for experimental torture. Anybody think of that? Well, guess what? That hasn't been a problem for a long time, because as way back as the early 1930s, when the CAB began, which is Chemical and Biological Weapons Warfare Departments, Unit 731 in Japan existed. And Unit 731, you can find a book on Unit 731 as well. Unit 731 was the most gruesome, sick, human experimentation program that this world has ever seen. And that was 93 years ago. 93 years ago. So I went off on that tangent to demonstrate that when you see predictive programming and movies like Leave the World Behind, there's no reason why you should be surprised, A, that it was produced by Obama, who was connected to this whole paradigm, Skull and Bones, which is connected directly to Yale, which Sutton covers extensively in his book, America's Secret Establishment. I actually pulled it out prior to make sure I could show your viewers. But this is the Anthony Sutton book, specifically on the Order of Skull and Bones. It traces the Bush family's involvement. He even has actual records, actual facsimiles. People say, how do you even know that that's real? He has actual facsimiles taken from real documents you can't really see. That's a diagram of the inside of the hall at Yale University of how the rooms broke down, reprints of rare materials within Order 322. Everything has been orchestrated to achieve a one world order. And that goes back as far back as H.G. Wells when he wrote the blueprints for a world revolution and the open conspiracy. It's all cause effect, right? Cause effect. So I'll give you a cause.
Have you seen online how the Simpsons, you know the Simpsons, right? They do all their predictive programming, and they've been right pretty much about every time, except they predicted Trump would have died. They actually predicted, and there was an episode that they had where it showed Trump being assassinated in a coffin before they closed it. And there's this thing circulating that this is one of the first times they've ever been wrong. They've predicted sports events. They've predicted people dying. They predicted stuff 15 years in advance. They predicted Trump would be president in 2016. And this was one of the first times that they were actually wrong.
Well, I'm not surprised because, first off, there's a lot you can find on Matt Groening as well. I forget all the details, but I saw a blurb not long ago on Matt Groening's connection to all of this and the etymology of his progression to The Simpsons. More things than people realized are by design. I'll go to another one. Amazon, biggest distributor of goods in the world. I think everybody can agree on that. Well, I didn't know that one of Jeff Bezos' closest relatives, I believe his grandfather, it's either his father or his grandfather. I'll have to go back and find the exact link of where I heard this and saw this, was involved with DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Administration. And until you know a citizen's habits and likes and dislikes and what they do with their time, what they buy, what they're interested in, until you know all of that, you can't really truly fully control a society. So DARPA had an idea for Amazon, and it was just kind of conveniently passed down to this relative of one of the founders of the idea. And it makes a lot of sense. You see this image of Bezos in his little room with the Amazon flag on the wall, and it's a classic American success story. It's garbage. It's garbage.
I don't know if you saw
Yeah.
PBD's podcast recently, Premise, but he talks about there's an author by the name, it's called The Pomp Letter of the 4 Steps to a Fall of a Nation. So, David, I'm going to send this to you.
4 Steps to the Fall of a Nation. And going into that, I do want to talk about the assassination attempt, because it's not an actual assassination. What do you think about that? I know there's a lot of people online that anything of you trying to uncover anything they think is a conspiracy. They think this guy was a rogue, just person that hated him. Apparently he was a registered Republican, but he actually donated to the Democrats. And now there's this whole thing of the Iranian. They're trying to say the Iranians, were actually behind it. What's your opinion of the whole thing?
A lot of misinformation regarding the Iranians. That's garbage. I'll start with this. David McGovern wrote a book called Programmed to Kill. And MK Ultra was a program that created different covert sleeper soldiers, if you will, for different needs for the government to achieve, or the deep state rather, to achieve whatever its goal might be. I believe, after hearing that this kid was kind of weird, but he knew like basically military grade computer systems and how to take apart all kinds of technology and put them back together. I believe that this was an MK Ultra esque affair gone wrong, where by the grace of God, the head was turned, and that millimeter or two was the difference between this being an effective assassination or not. And I say this because there is no way, with the sophisticated nature of the Secret Service and the sophisticated nature of these events being done thousands of times at this point for ex-presidents, current presidents, people trying to become presidents, there is no other way to look at it than there was a mole in the Secret Service and or the FBI, and then simultaneously this sleeper soldier was activated to do what he was bred to do, and he was apparently very secluded. His family was very, very weird from what I hear. He wasn't like a very personable kid. These things happen when they're young. When you look and read Project Artichoke by David M. Sylvie, Vietnam veteran who was involved in these projects, he has a diary that was published about these projects. Artichoke preceded MK Ultra, and after that, it's classified. We don't know. There's all kinds of other projects, MK Search, MK Naomi, but we don't know where it is now. But the truth is, I think this kid was a asset of that sort, because triggering a civil war and bringing down the country, like you mentioned, there's 4 ways to bring down a nation. A civil war can be triggered to accomplish that. If Trump would have went down, whether you like the guy or not, whether you're going to vote for him or not, and me personally, I think RFK Jr. is the vote, even though I know he probably doesn't have a chance to win. I'm still going to exercise my democratic right to vote for who I think is the best choice regardless. And I think RFK is the guy because of all the things I've talked about already. But if Trump were to go down, then you would have a massive civilian conflict at the nation's capital, which would have allowed President Biden to enact martial law, which would have by default delayed the election, which then triggers all the globalization goals would then have been accelerated. So I believe, you ask, why would that happen? Why would they do that? Well, that's why, because globalism is the ultimate goal. And the Cloward-Piven strategy, which is taught at Columbia University, which Hillary Clinton was a student of, Obama was a student of, it teaches that you have to simultaneously bring down a nation from different pillars of within the nation. You overload systems. And when you overload enough of the systems, the nation can no longer function. And that's the goal, because these people believe in a problem solution dialectic. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. It's a German philosophy. You create the problems knowing your predetermined solution will create the predetermined history that you want to have created. So here we go. We'll do an exercise. Problem. Trump is against the globalist plan. Solution. Take him out. Effect. Globalization can continue and actually be accelerated because you can use civil unrest as a fear tactic to have regular citizens load themselves on the bus to FEMA camps and do what they're supposed to do. So that then what H.G. Wells talked about in Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for World Revolution in the 1920s when he wrote it, that can actually come to pass. And these are all things that if people just open their brain and use the space between their ears to actually be a critical thinker and stop cowering to what they're told by people who do not care about them and that they are viewed as useless eaters to these people, if they're willing to do that and step outside the fear of what other people will think, then maybe this country has a chance. If not, what we just saw with that attempted assassination on Trump, a lot of these operatives do not miss. They do not miss. And when you have an operative like that, it's very easy. It's very easy to pitch the lone wolf theory because everything has built up to that being possible.
Scapegoat kind of thing.
It's exactly what it is. They did it with Lee Harvey Oswald, and then they took him out, and they took out the guy that killed him too. So, it's all, you can trace all of this. So I'll go one layer deeper. A few years ago, when I decided that I was going to get into some investigative journalism, and I'm still developing it, Stanley Craig reports. That's what it'll be. When I was still developing it, I came in contact, we'll call him Gray. Call him Gray. We won't name him. It's a gentleman who, in his mid-30s, woke up one day and all of a sudden didn't understand how he knew government secret clearance level security systems. All this stuff was in his head. Like, where did this come from? Why do I know how to hack into the Pentagon? Why do I know how to build these massive security systems? Why do I know how to manage a marijuana farm all of a sudden? Turns out, at a young age, he was indoctrinated into the Project Monarch program, which created him as an asset unbeknownst to him. And they can program, there's programmed amnesia it's disassociation. When you look at any psychologist, advanced psychologist talking about the mind of a child, before the age of 4, when the mind of a child is exposed to massive trauma, the child will disassociate and you will create split personalities within that child. This is science. This is not like conspiracy theory. This is proven psychology. So when you can create a disassociative state in the mind of a child, and then you couple that with controlling where they go, who they're with, what they are learning, what they are doing, by the time they are 20, 21, the hypnosis and the dissociative states are so ingrained in who they are as a person that it's like clockwork for the orchestrator of that. And this gentleman, Gray, woke up and he realized what had happened to him. His cover was he was growing marijuana. He was a marijuana grower, and he had a huge drug dealing business, and that was his cover. And then simultaneously, they would throw him into these amnesiac states, and he would go and he would complete missions that were programmed into him to complete, unbeknownst to him. Well, one day the veil ended, and he started whistleblowing, and they threw him in jail for his cover. They threw him in jail for being a weed dealer and a weed manufacturer, and that was the cover that they programmed into him. And he realized all this, and he was wrongly imprisoned. He gets out. He gets his record clear. He's in touch with a lot of people in the Senate Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee is trying to expose this, trying to protect whistleblowers as we speak. I have a direct line of communication with him for about 3 years now, 3 years now. And I did a 2-hour interview with him that is not released, that I have on a small recorder. And let me tell you guys, what I just broke down to you is the tip of the ice that created the iceberg, if you will, because
Wow.
it's as authentic and as real as it gets. So when I tell you why I think that this Crooks kid was that, it's not unfounded.
Well, so I want to go into these 4 steps that kind of go right back to what you were saying, and then I want to get your feedback and your kind of direction of what step do you think that we're currently at, and are we going to get to the next step? So Yuri Benzeminov, a former Russian KGB official who defected to the United States, and in an interview in 1985, he explains that there are 4 main steps to ideological subversion. Step number 1, demoralization. This process can take 15 to 20 years, approximately a generation, and involves the intellectual reprogramming of young people to become sympathetic to ideals and gravitate closer to socialism and communism. The idea to cement ethos, ideals, and frameworks into the minds of people who will one day become the leaders of the nation's government, corporations, and military. As this new generation begins to take leadership roles, the older generation becomes seed control to a subset of population that has different ideas. That's number 1. Number 2, destabilization. This stage of the process is intended to change a country's economy, foreign relations, and defense systems. The driving force is a larger and larger government, which continues to promise a variety of social welfare benefits. It ultimately doesn't matter if they successfully deliver on their promises, because the more promise of a stronger society, a stronger social safety net becomes too much for the demoralization generation to resist. Number 3, crisis. This stage is the shortest in terms of timeline, meaning it could merely take weeks. This is a catastrophic event that takes place and leads to social unrest dividing the nation. The division of the population presents an opportunity for a significant shift in power and control at the government level. Past examples would include the overthrowing of government in Egypt and Libya in the last decade. Number 4, normalization. This is the final stage of the cycle. It is the process of citizens accepting communism/socialism as the select way of life. They no longer fight the new model, but rather believed that this is the standard of governance for everyone around the world.
So repeat it real quick, just the names of the 4 stages.
Number 1, demoralization. Number 2, destabilization. Number 3, crisis. And number 4, normalization. Which one do you think?
I'm really happy you brought up Yuri. I'm very happy you brought up Yuri, because I came across Yuri Bezmenagov probably about 2.5 years ago, and I watched his lecture he did at a U.S. university where he broke this down in detail. Now, the destabilization has already occurred. The demoralization really happened shortly after he was speaking. The 90s was the demoralization decade, leading up to 9/11. 9/11 was an event that changed the world and the country forever. Since 9/11, we are a different country completely, where these socialistic ideas have been more and more normalized behind the guise of fear and safety, because that's the only way that people will lay down their freedom, is when they are afraid. You see, 2 things drive human activity. 2 things only: fear and ambition. They're the 2 things that drive human activity. If you're afraid, you know what that leads to. That leads to, please help. Help me. What do I do? If you're ambitious, that leads to, I know what to do, and I'm going to do it. And it doesn't matter what you say, because my ambition is leading me, not your fear. Those 2 things lead human activity. Everything's already been normalized. We're almost past the normalization phase, in my opinion. And within those, there's 2 more phases that branch off of that we are currently in the stages of: tribalization and dehumanization. The tribalization has already occurred. The tribalization, you look at this country, it's more tribalized than the United States of America has ever been. Dehumanization, look around. No one can even tell you with a straight face at this point what a woman is. Everything is dehumanized. The children are under attack. The reproductive nature of children are under attack. They're passing laws in California right now that state that if a child comes to a teacher in school and says, I want to be a woman if they're a boy, or I want to be a boy if they're a girl. The teacher doesn't even have to tell the parents. Part and
Makes me
parcel of
so
communism.
mad.
It's sickening. It's literally sickening. Part and parcel of communism and socialism is destroying the nuclear family. The nuclear family and the middle class, specifically the middle class nuclear family, is the number one threat to the globalists achieving what they want to achieve. A great, great documentary called Plandemic 3 is worth watching. You can find it. They have the handle, I believe, is just Plandemic on X. The gentleman who put it together had voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary. And then he realized at one point, he had an epiphany moment, like looking around, what am I doing? What is this? And then he started researching. He started researching how China became what it is today. He started researching how some of these previously free nations became subjectified and subjected to communist rule. And how did that occur? And you know what? What's happening in this country right now is exactly what preceded what happened in those countries. And the normalization, we're already past it. Yuri was talking about those things, guys, in 1984. And there's some great videos
Yep.
of him that your viewers can find. Shortly thereafter, again, the demoralization went through its phases. And it really, there's kind of some gray area between these phases. You know, demoralization can kind of coincide simultaneously with the crisis event, because every crisis is an opportunity. Let's not forget that. Every crisis is an opportunity. That's true in political science. That's true in sales. That's true in everything you do. Use a crisis as a catapult point, as a way not to be an obstacle to go around, but an obstacle to go through. And in this case, going through what? Going through the Republic of the United States to bring it to its knees without the people even realizing that they asked for it. You see, when it comes down to it, the United States citizens are asking for what's coming. And it's all been laid out. It's all been laid out. The Committee of 300, Dr. John Coleman, you can find his lecture on YouTube from the 90s. It's an old VHS tape that someone uploaded to YouTube. Thank God for that person. He was an MI6 operative, and he figured all this out when he was in Angola on a secret mission. He came across some documents that were not supposed to be in his mission documents, and they exposed this Committee of 300. In his book, he names these people. This committee rules the world. There have been a few times where it's slipped that they exist as well, and it's been scrubbed from history.
Dude, that's wild, man.
I don't want this to be the truth, but it's the truth. I don't want this to be the truth.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
the hard truth.
It's becoming more and more, as you mentioned, polarized. And bringing a nation to its knees is if you can attack the nuclear family, you've won. And at what point in this nation do you think that we got to such a point where they're openly attacking children? Like, what was the switch that went off, even in our government, our cultural entities, that got us to this place of attacking children? Because I've never seen it this bad.
No, when you have transvestites going into elementary schools, that's grooming. When you have parades of grown men, excuse my language, whipping their cocks around in front of 8, 9, 10-year-old children, and parents standing by, smiling, laughing, waving a Babylonian rainbow flag that is basically worshiping Lucifer directly, you're so far gone that there's no coming back. And that's where this nation is. And it was prophesied in the book of Daniel specifically in the book of Daniel. But to go back to your question, I believe that this all kind of started to shift this way somewhere between 2010 and 2015. And it's no surprise when you read Snowden's book, Permanent Record, which I recommend to everybody. 2013 is when he helped build what was called the Red Queen. The Red Queen is a massive computer system that collects for the NSA every single piece of digital communication and digital text messages, email. Every single communication that exists is collected by this Red Queen that is already, by 2013 when they built it, sentient AI. Already sentient AI. 2013. Snowden exposes this in his book. This is why they want him jailed too. This is why he can't come back to the U.S. because He was sick with what he learned, and he was still before he exposed everything, he went to work every day for months, and he had the overnight shift, and he would go to a computer he wasn't supposed to be at, and he found a way to get around their tracking system to get all this stuff off those computers to expose it so nobody would know. But in his book, he explains the Red Queen. That was 11 years ago, guys. That was 11 years ago. Where do you think that device, that sentient device, is now? Everyone talking about the moment of clarity for AI when it knows what it is. I got news for everybody. That's just a mainstream message. We're already there. We're already there. How and why do you think when you go on Facebook, and if I've done this experiment many times on my Facebook, I go up and I put something up along the lines of psychological warfare is attacking your children. Lucifer's in direct control of all these systems. Open your eyes, right? One like, and it's my mother. They're not showing it to anybody because the AI is controlling that. But then I could put up,
So true.
oh man, Jake Paul is so wild, man. This dude is a monster. I love watching him fight. 74 likes. Because the idea is when you can keep people with the veil covering their face of truth and they don't have God in their life, they have no compass, then they have no way to even know that the veil exists to begin with. And that's what has happened from like 2010 to 2015 to now. And personally, I believe, and I hate to say this because I love life and I have big plans for life and I want to do things. I'm building a couple great businesses right now. I believe that within the next 5 calendar years, they will collapse the monetary system. The United States as we know it will probably cease to exist, and they'll come in with this big global solution at the United Nations. It's going to take another big pandemic. It's going to take a collapse of the money system. It's going to take some kind of event like that where they have plausible deniability for even causing it. Because the built-in plausible deniability is how this all works. It has to be plausible that this just happened and no one made this happen. Of course they made it happen because these structures have been in place with that exact end goal for decades, since the coup d'etat, really, of JFK being eliminated from the whole system.
Are you referring to isn't it Project 2030?
2030, yeah. It's
Project 2030.
by the World Economic Forum.
The World Economic Forum is trying to... what are they trying to institute then?
It's UN Agenda 2030. And what they have is a list of what they call Sustainable Development Goals. And Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, is a euphemism for we're going to remove more freedom and you're going to be okay with it because we're going to tell you that the world's environment depends on it. That's what Sustainable Development Goals really is saying. And the origin of that is an organization called the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome wrote a publication in the 70s, and they wrote a newer one now called The Limits to Growth, which is directly connected to the World Economic Forum. But behind the Club of Rome is the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And the Royal Institute of International Affairs answered directly to the monarchy of Britain. And they've been in control of world affairs for a long time. Every single Secretary of State since the RIAA came to be, has been selected by the RIAA. And this is something that Dr. John Coleman, former MI6 agent, gets into in his video, The Committee of 300, which I referenced earlier. You can find a very in-depth breakdown of the origin of the Club of Rome. You can even find the origin of these sustainable development goals in their writing that was adopted by the UN, that was adopted by the World Economic Forum. Like I said earlier, it's all about tracing the etymology, the root. And that's how you get to the cause of it all and the real true beginning of it all. And there have even been guys that have defected from the UN because they are trying to expose this. I forget the gentleman's name. I watched a video of a European gentleman who used to be the head of a very important department within the UN. And he's saying basically like, this is all crap to eliminate sovereignty. The goal of the United Nations, think about it, United Nations, what are they even saying? It's globalism. Globalism has demonic roots. Gary Kah wrote a book called The Demonic Roots of Globalism specifically. He wrote multiple books. One of them also called Global Occupation. Gary Kah, K-A-H. You can find that as well. I just want to reiterate again, because it's important as I go through this, that this is not coming from some lunatic Philly kid's mind. This is coming from the truth that was given to me and imparted on me partially by God leading me to these sources, and secondly, by these sources even existing with more credibility than I could ever dream to have in terms of in this space and in this topic realm. And you know, sustainable development is UN Agenda 2030. There's a list of all the goals. That's why they're trying to attack farming. Initially, go back to the 80s, right? The collapse of the U.S. steel industry. You ask yourself, how and why did that happen? Well, it happened because the U.S. was becoming too strong for this globalism plan to work. You have to have a U.S. that is dependent on other nations for manufacturing, that is dependent on other nations for money needs, that is perpetually in debt, and that citizens are easy to demoralize and turn ideologically, like you mentioned with Yuri earlier. You have to have all these things. So the Club of Rome and the RIAA put out a dictate secretly that U.S. industry has to be slowed down. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. steel industry collapses. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, all these places that were producing, there were 5,000 U.S. made ships on the waters globally then, steel, U.S. steel. As of the 90s, there was 212, 220. That's also from Dr. John Coleman. Again, I really encourage everyone to look into Dr. John Coleman, Professor Anthony Sutton. Those two gentlemen are key to really understanding a lot of what I'm talking about. And then from there, you will learn a lot more if you read footnotes and really become a researcher. You have to be your own researcher. You have to be your own critical thinker. That's the key to all of this. Unless we have enough of us guys, what no one's able to stop what is already in place. And this Red Queen that Snowden exposed has been sentient for 11 years.
Yeah, so when it comes to neuromonitoring and DEI, how do you feel like that plays into what you just mentioned? Because I think psychological subversion is what we're talking about, and it's always trying to redirect and get away from the point. Specifically with society, they're very, very. I'm very cognitive that if the media or if the globalists or the establishment is wanting me to focus on something, it's because they're directing me away from something else. So what is the purpose of DEI as it stands, and then how does that fit in with neuromonitoring?
Yeah, well, the whole concept of DEI works part and parcel with the psychological operations because, like you said, it is changing the way people think. The point of a PSYOP is to modify behavior. So a good example is during COVID, everybody being told to put a mask on. That's simultaneously dehumanizing and simultaneously behavior modification. And that's a psychological operation. And right before COVID, New Jersey governor put out a press release stating that be careful, the U.S. is under attack, multiple psychological operations domestically and internationally. And this came off the governor's desk, but it was just kind of slipped under the rug by the mainstream. So with the whole idea of DEI, it goes back to manipulating the kids' minds. I have no problem with diversity. I mean, really, I grew up in a very diverse part of Northeast Philly. What they've done is perverted these concepts. These concepts have been perverted and manipulated to achieve an end goal, which is not the original idea of multiculturalism as we were taught in middle school. And, multiculturalism on its face, being friendly to other cultures, being interested in other cultures, talking to people of all walks of life, just being a human. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But when you start to use these things to manipulate the minds of people to create more isolated groups within humanity, because that's the real goal. The goal is to tribalize, like I mentioned. So that serves that end. The DEI concept, as they perverted it and ran with it, serves the concept of tribalization, where now you have even more tribes and tribes within tribes. So now you don't only have, say, LGBTQ, you also have people within that are pushing for pedophilia to be included in that group. How sick is that?
As a preference.
As a preference. And there's actually people at colleges and universities dedicating their time, which is funded by taxpayer money, to writing papers defending that as a preference. It is the most sickening thing that I've ever heard, and it's appalling. And recently there was a library locally here in Philly in Northeast that put out a thing about we're going to have this drag queen come talk to these kids, and our church put it out that was happening and to sign a petition for it, but don't go. I was very close to showing up and having a few words with some of these people, but I chose not to because I got my LTC, and that never ends well. So I chose to just steer clear of that. But there are some people as we go who will not, and that's by design, because the number one tribe, if you will, to demonize here in all of this is the Christian male. It's just the truth. I mean, I'm going to say it because it's the truth. I'm not saying it because I'm a white Christian male. I'm saying it because it is what it is. The number one target, and this was said 20 years ago in a DHS document, saying in 20 years, the number one threat as domestic terrorists will be the white Christian male, because it goes back to the Hegelian dialectic, problem, solution. When you create and control both sides, you create a predetermined history. And that's what they have created. So it's way easier now to create this lone wolf scenario targeting that specific tribe, if you will, within the tribalization, whereas DEI shelters the other tribes because it's been perverted. If everybody was just human, and Morgan Freeman said this best once, he said about racism, stop talking about it.
And
just
Black History Month, yeah. That's the same thing.
Just be human.
Yeah.
All it does is put a focus on differences. It doesn't cure differences or unify anybody. It just puts a focus on the differences. And, I'm sure these are going to be some great explosive comments we're going to get on this one. And I'm excited to see what they are, because I look at every opportunity like that as an opportunity to educate. And another unfortunate fact about that, though, guys, is that from the foundation of the world, these things were predetermined and written. Some people are simply incapable from birth of processing all of this. And that's the reality of humanity. Not everybody's going to be able to process what we're saying, digest what we're saying, and then take it and modify their behavior in a way that is healthy for them and for their mind to critically think, because they are so programmed and engulfed in the psychological warfare epidemic, because it is an epidemic that exists, that they are forever going to be separated from the truth. And that's an unfortunate fact of our reality in 2020.
Dude, it is crazy, man, because how many people I've had in my life, especially, it's usually those very young 18 to 23, 24-year-old Gen Zers that have told me that I am naturally racist because I'm white. There's just unintentionally, I just naturally have a racist
implicit bias.
I'm like, dude, growing up, I think I had 12 friends. Let's say 12 closest friends.
Right.
I think 11 of them were black. Like, I wanted to be black growing up because I was like, this is the coolest community. These are my boys. I love all this. So I'm like, you don't know me. And then I've also had...
It's manufactured. Yeah, it's manufactured.
It's so manufactured. And I've had someone, one of my good friends, he works at a sales company, and he told me that they would not hire white men because they had to fill a quota in order to get $100,000 grant, or it might have been $500,000, but it was in that range, grant from the government for having diversity. So they were intentionally not looking for just what makes you the best candidate. Yeah. They had to go for the Hispanic females, the trans, the gay, whatever it was, to make sure there was diversity instead of looking at just who's the best.
Yeah,
and so
it should be merit.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I talked to a guy who's in New York a couple days ago about marketing our channel, right? He's a marketing genius guru. Like, hey, we want to market our YouTube channel. We want to get more views, more clicks, get the message out. And he said, and he knows about the channel. He said, well, to be honest, Isaac, all of the guys that are in high levels of marketing or high levels of engagement with the establishment, he said the future is female.
And so this guy didn't believe that.
And he didn't believe it himself, but he said they will not give you money unless you're in the LGBTQ, you're a minority, or you're a woman that is empowered to start a company. And he said,
So
if you're a
off of
white
that, off
male,
of that,
it's just not possible.
Disney, I don't know if you heard, Disney recently was exposed in an undercover operation by James O'Keefe.
We reacted to that.
Okay, very good, very good. Yeah, so that speaks exactly to what you guys are saying. This isn't like a fallacy. This isn't like some crackpot theory. This is the truth. And I'm of the personal belief that I don't care what color you are, I don't care what sexual preference you have, I don't care what any of that is. If your merit and your ability merits that you deserve a position or you deserve a role, then you get that position. This whole idea of participation trophy now getting into society at the highest levels is horrible, because all that does is it gives people that have real ability less incentive to use that ability. It creates the opposite effect, and then the quality of whatever these roles are is going to suffer, because people are only in there based on their physical and emotional and mental characteristics instead of their actual talent and abilities to do the job. We literally live in the twilight zone, guys.
And going into this with masculinity, because that's kind of a core of, big part of me and Isaac's heart is bringing back, what does healthy masculinity look like, right? You have right now our society is, you have the red pill movement that is all about empowering men. You shouldn't get married because women will take half your money, yada, yada. But, at the same time, they teach good things about discipline and actually going out and making a difference in this world. And, you have the Andrew Tates of the world, which I like a lot of what Andrew Tate says.
Yeah, Andrew Tate's good. He's a good one.
I like Andrew Tate a lot, and actually talking about the Matrix, which you can go into that maybe a little bit after this, because his whole thing is the Matrix. The Matrix is after me. They give you three things. First, they ruin your reputation, they put you in jail, or they cancel you, they put you in jail, and then they kill you. So he said that about Trump, that Trump was in the third stage. But what's your kind of views in this very feministic society? Because I've known so many people that say, well, I'm just born more feminine, and therefore, I don't really want to have to do the things that make, what traditionally is a man. My wife kind of does that more. So what's your opinion on our society going towards masculinity and femininity? How do you think that's working out right now?
Well, not good, because I think that it's important to have defined roles. I don't think there's anything wrong with a defined role. I think that there's a normal, natural order that has been continuously suppressed. A woman is nurturing. A woman is beautiful in many ways. A woman is meant to, take care of a child in a way that a man could never even imagine taking care of a child and giving birth. And all the things that a woman does are amazing and of God. I mean, it's the miracle that is a woman is nothing like the miracle that is a man. So I look at both things as a positive force combined. And it's almost like a transformer. When you combine and you observe your role in the machine, that's truly how we were created to be. I'm not a big bang guy. This all happened by accident. No, this was designed with very specific nature involved and very specific reasons involved. And again, because Lucifer is in control of our world, he's the ruler of this world. Satan is the ruler of earthly desire, of earthly need, of all the entertainment systems that push those things. There's no wonder that he would want to attack and bring down natural order, because natural order can get you closer to your creator. So it all goes back to what I said in the beginning. And, whether this is a well-received message, a message that is considered, hateful in any way, that's too bad, because the truth is the truth. I'm going to speak what the truth is freely. And if anybody doesn't like it, they don't have to listen to me or watch me. But the fact is, I think that it's important to have a legitimate, real division of male and female. There's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing evil. There is nothing hateful about that. It goes back to behavior modification, like we mentioned, and attacking the minds of the children. They're trying to attack these children where we're not going to recognize humanity in some time, maybe 10, 20 years from now. You won't recognize humanity. And that's the goal. The goal is to summon the demon via AI. And that's where it's headed. And Thomas Horn's recent book before he passed, his most recent writing he put out, was literally called Summoning the Demon. And it talks about how they're going to make the new godhead, this world structure AI that people will literally worship, and then it will be outlawed to worship an actual creator.
Wow. No, I
I
love
want to
that.
talk about with you, premise the idea of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 with Lyndon B. Johnson and how that affected the black family specifically. What are your thoughts on how it affected specifically black men in the home? Because right now the black community is at all-time low when it comes to fathers being in the home. I believe is 24%. It used to be above 60%. It actually was higher than the white family in the early, 1960s, 1970s. How do you think that's affect masculinity as a whole across minority segments, specifically also culture in general?
Well, when impoverished, whether no matter what color you are, when you're impoverished, I think you're more susceptible to things that can control you because you have less control over your life. So when these ideas are pushed, whether it's femininity in a masculine body or the vice versa, whatever it is, I feel like people who are impoverished and have less in general are more susceptible to those things. So the goal of that act has been completely ruined at this point in the world. I mean, that's why they took out MLK. He was MLK and RFK Sr. They were good friends. And they were really trying to bridge the gap between white and black in this country. And 1968 was a very explosive year. Shortly thereafter, you have Malcolm X taken out as well, even though he had a different approach. And I read the Malcolm X autobiography, a phenomenal read. I read that in college. Even though they took a different approach to their messages, all of them, for the most part, would have been, I believe, very, very happy to see a nation where the whole racial talk of any sort was completely behind us as a country. And they were pushing us that way. But the establishment we've already outlined and discussed in this talk, it's not in their interest for that. Unity is the last thing that they want. Yuri Brezmenigov also explained that the race topic would be the primary way that demoralization and tribalization and normalization of all these things could occur. That would be the primary tool that would be used by these organizations to ensure that unity never happened. So, I feel bad for marginalized communities in this world because it wasn't their choice to be in these crack-filled, heroin-filled city, urban, broken down jungles. And I'm always in these parts of town. I'm always over there. So I'm a real estate agent. So I'm always hunting down different properties and buying properties or helping people buy properties for different folks looking at properties. And I'm always in these zones. And I talk to people in these neighborhoods all the time. I'll walk right up to people that I'm going to a house. Hey, how are you? How's your morning? How was your day today? Because that's not something they're used to. The other race, whether it's if you're a white man approaching a black man or vice versa, there's been so much demonization that's happened that has affected your perception of that person in front of you. 99% of the time, it's not true. That's just another human that wants to be nice to you. That's just another human that will be happy to talk football with you or happy to talk about what they're doing for their family right now and how maybe that you can help them or they can help you. We're good humans, and I believe a lot of us are just good humans at heart, but some are more susceptible to being manipulated by these programmed messages that we've discussed. And I believe that the marginalized and impoverished communities are the easiest to modify their behavior because specifically of the situation they are in. And they're more dependent on government usually too, which is all by design. It's all by design.
I want to do a couple quick fire questions for you.
Yeah,
You can
man.
either say one answer, one sentence, whatever you want.
I like it.
What do you think happens to the Tates if you're up to date? Do you think they go back to jail by the Matrix? Do you think that something worse happens? Obviously, we don't want to speak things into existence, but if you're up to date with the Tates, what do you think is going to happen with them?
He's a loose cannon. I mean, I watched some of his videos, and I believe in freedom of speech. This guy is as free as it gets. I think he's going to be okay. I think that he actually serves the establishment in ways that he doesn't realize, honestly. Because there needs to be two sides to this for a conflict to even exist. For there even to be a successful civil war, there has to be two strong sides, and he serves that purpose.
I like it. Another one. Who wins the Super Bowl in 2025?
Oh, Philadelphia Eagles, of course.
As long as it's not the Cowboys or the
definitely
Patriots,
not the Carolina
bro,
Panthers.
or
There's no
nobody
way.
from the NFC South, because we're diehard Carolina Panther fans. I had to throw that one out there real
Okay,
quick.
cool.
Bro, we need some help, man. Our goal, within, I would say, 6 months to a year, once we get this channel really off the ground, me and JP, who you met on our previous pod or our NFL draft show, we want to create like some kind of sports show, fantasy. So by you guys subscribing and we get big up, we'll dive into sports, man. You can be one of our regular guests.
All right,
man.
I'm going to ask this one.
I like it.
Premise, what is your message of hope to Gen Z? Obviously, it's very polarized. They're very lost. The identity crisis that's going on right now in this country and world just in general is very polarizing, and it's very hard to kind of see through the crevices of even your own, ideological belief system. What is your message of hope to them?
When you see something, follow your instinct and your heart to know what you're actually seeing. And if you're not sure, research it yourself. Do not be told. If you do those things, you will inevitably be led to God. And that's the only hope that any of us actually have.
Another one, if there's a young kid out there that wants to get into the music industry, because everybody wants to be, the next rapper, the next singer, now with online, it seems to be a lot more possible, right? I'm scrolling through my feed all day and there's these guys, that are just, doing remixes and they're just singing to the camera and they have 100,000 likes. I'm like, geez, dude, back in my day, that was not the case. But if someone really wants to get into the music industry, what's your advice to them? What steps should they take? And just kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, first off, find your sound. Don't worry about replicating anybody else. You might have influences that come through in your music. I sure did when I first started, with who I listened to growing up. But you want to find your sound and master your tools. Don't worry about what this guy's using, what that guy's using. If all you need to get what you need done is a computer and a mouse, then hey, make it happen. Master it though. Put your 10,000 hours in. Master it. And don't be afraid to be your best cheerleader, your biggest cheerleader. Don't be afraid to get yourself out there and talk to people and spark up a conversation at a local event. You never know who you might meet. You never know what someone's role might be. And you also never know who's watching if you're acting like a knucklehead in public. So you want to be careful because you can ruin blessings before you even have a chance to get them in the music business. And I'm speaking from experience from when I was younger.
Someone once told me, man, this stuck with me forever. They said, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. So it's about what can you do to stick out, because you can know a lot of people, but if you're not on their mind, it doesn't mean anything.
Your network is your net worth.
Yeah, your network is your net worth.
Exactly.
Real quick, another Spitfire. Greatest rapper of this generation and greatest rapper of all time.
Greatest rapper of all time, Black Thought from the Roots, from me lyrically. I mean, dude is just another level. Greatest rapper of this generation, I would probably have to give it to Kendrick, just on lyricism, delivery, content. I'm not a big fan of some of the content, but
stuff.
Lyrical delivery, his poetic nature. I mean, this guy exemplifies what a rap poet actually is. And I would have to go with Kendrick now, but Black Thought is untouchable all time.
Amazing. So speaking of Kendrick Lamar, what is your thought between the beef between him and Drake right now?
Big distraction for society, like we talked about earlier. Nah, but Drake has he's actually not really been, since he put out, if you're reading this, it's too late. He kind of lost me since that album. I love that album. When I was listening to that kind of hip hop, I love that album. But I don't really, I'm not putting that stuff in my mind and my ears as much as I used to, because everything you put into your brain, the sounds, the words, they unlock doors too. So I'm real cognizant and careful of what I even listen to these days.
All right, next question, and this is a little bit of a humdinger, as we say in the South. Is Eminem gay?
I think that Eminem obviously is attracted to women, but I do think that as part of some initiatory processes, he may have had to do some things he didn't want to do. We'll never really truly know. But look, I've learned a lot about these organizations from talking to people that have been involved with them, from reading documents maybe I shouldn't have read or people don't normally read. But the truth is, initiatory processes are real, and the origins of those can be found in Oliver's book I mentioned earlier, The History of Initiation. The history of initiation. Basically, when you just take the words, and these things are real. So I'd say it's likely that he might have had some kind of experience that was against his will while he was turned away from somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes back to the whole, what was it, the Nickelodeon or Disney? What was it, the thing that where all these kids from back in the day, Nickelodeon, where that whole thing about kids that had been taken advantage of when they're younger in order to get to that stage, and now it's finally starting to come out. But dude, you and us and people like us have been speaking it forever. Alex Jones has been speaking it forever, and everybody just labeled him a crazy conspiracy theorist. But a lot of what he said actually ends up coming to be true. So I'm just glad that we're kind of in a time of things being exposed, and some of us have been speaking this stuff forever now seem to actually be right. But man, we really appreciate you, Premise, man.
Great. I want to end on this real quick. I want to end on this because I feel like a lot of what we said is really intense. I want to end on a message of hope for America. So what is your message of hope for America as it stands today, and how can people get behind the message that you say on a general level?
Stay vigilant, stay real, and find Jesus Christ. And you can do that by opening your Bible. Now, I'm not a preacher, I'm not a pastor, but I'm speaking from experience. I've been through the darkest of the dark parts of this world and darkest of the dark parts of this country. And unfortunately, there is nothing that this world is going to offer you or say that it can offer you that is going to be better than finding the true and actual love of Jesus. And that's just the truth. And I've come to this point in my life where I can freely and openly and confidently proclaim that. And I'm going to tell my future for you guys right now. What's going to happen is within a year, 2 years, say something happens in my career and people are digging for things on me, right? I'm excited for them to find this podcast.
Come on, man.
Let's go, man.
It's going to happen. We believe in you, and we really appreciate you coming on. Obviously, this is just the beginning of your story, of your public life. And as it maturates for you, and as we get bigger as a channel, let's have you on again. Let's create a series and
a lot more,
dig deeper into the rabbit hole, because we just got on the surface today, but there's so much more to go through. And David,
if you guys like Premise, I mean, this is the guy. Like and subscribe to this video and comment below. Premise is the man. Something. Let us know. What you think of him, because you're a great communicator, man, and you've really inspired us to really do our own research, because you're very educated in what you talk about. You're not somebody that just kind of comes on and tries to figure stuff out on the spot. You know what you're talking about. You have an authority in the space. And no, we appreciate you, man. We're definitely going to have you on again. We'd be honored to have you as often as you want. And we'll kind of dig more into a lot of different stuff. But before we get off, you're going to send me the links. So guys, check the description. The links to the books that he's talking about will be below. Any other information that he talked about, you can find it below. So if you want to start your own journey of research, start reading, because that's the best advice us and I'm sure Premise can give you. Also, Prem, we're going to do the hot ones thing of you just, kind of how can people find you? How can people follow you, be engaged with you, all of that stuff?
Yeah, on X is very simple. Premise SNN, simple. And on IG, Premise _. My domain with a lot of my music work and my sports media work can be found at creativedescentllc.com. David, Isaac, I really appreciate you guys.
Of course, man. And we'll also have those links below so you don't have to remember them. All of that stuff will be in the description, so definitely check that out. But bro, we appreciate you, man. You are our first,
likewise.
Again, remember this, our first virtual guest. We've had a couple of guests, of our own friends, locally, but you're our first online guest. I respect you, man, and only great things to come for you, man. So we appreciate you. And it's been an honor, bro.
All right, man.
Thank you.
Talk to you guys soon.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Talk to you soon. Thanks again.